On July 19, 2025, emergency dispatch systems across the United States were handling approximately 240,000 calls per day. Every call to 911 from a mobile phone triggered an automated location detection system that identified the caller's position and routed the call to the appropriate public safety answering point, the dispatch center responsible for that geographic area. The system had evolved over decades from basic technology that could only identify which cell tower handled a call to sophisticated positioning that could pinpoint a caller's location within meters. The routing process happened in milliseconds. A person dialed 911. Their phone transmitted location data. The mobile carrier's network consulted routing databases to determine which PSAP should receive the call. The call was connected. A dispatcher answered. The entire sequence took less than 4 seconds under normal conditions. Speed was critical. In cardiac emergencies, stroke cases, severe trauma, every second of delay reduced survival probability. At 14:27 Eastern Time, a woman in suburban Atlanta dialed 911 to report her husband was experiencing chest pain and difficulty breathing. Classic symptoms of a heart attack. Her call should have been routed to the Fulton County Emergency Dispatch Center, which covered her neighborhood and could dispatch an ambulance that was stationed approximately 4 minutes away. The routing system received her location data, consulted its database, and made a decision. The call was routed to the DeKalb County Dispatch Center instead. DeKalb County bordered Fulton County but wasn't responsible for emergency services in the caller's location. When the dispatcher answered, she immediately recognized the address was outside her jurisdiction. Standard procedure required her to transfer the call back to the correct PSAP. The transfer took 47 seconds, time spent explaining the situation to the Fulton County dispatcher, confirming the address, and connecting the call properly. The Fulton County dispatcher took the information and dispatched an ambulance. But the 47-second routing error plus the additional time needed to re-explain the emergency meant the ambulance was dispatched 2 minutes and 18 seconds after the initial 911 call. In a system optimized for seconds, that was an eternity. For a heart attack patient, every minute of delay increased the probability of permanent cardiac damage or death. The routing error seemed like a technical glitch. One misconfigured record in a database. One call sent to the wrong dispatch center. It would be logged, reviewed by technical staff during routine maintenance, and corrected. Nobody would think twice about it because occasional routing errors were inevitable in a system processing hundreds of thousands of calls daily, except it wasn't one call. At 14:31 Eastern Time, a traffic accident on Interstate 20 in Birmingham, Alabama generated multiple 911 calls from witnesses. The calls should have been routed to the Jefferson County Emergency Dispatch Center. Instead, they were routed to Tuscaloosa County, 90 kilometers away. Each call had to be manually transferred back to the correct jurisdiction. The first ambulance wasn't dispatched until 6 minutes after the initial 911 calls, even though a fire station with emergency medical capabilities was less than 2 minutes from the accident scene. At 14:44, a residential fire in Charlotte, North Carolina was reported by a neighbor who saw smoke coming from a window. The call was routed to a dispatch center in Gastonia, 40 kilometers away. The transfer delay meant the fire department wasn't notified until 4 minutes after the call. By the time firefighters arrived, the fire had spread from one room to engulf half the structure. The pattern was emerging across 23 cities simultaneously. Memphis, Nashville, Jacksonville, Oklahoma City, Louisville, Richmond, Raleigh, Tucson, Fresno, Omaha, Virginia Beach, Colorado Springs, Kansas City, Mesa, Atlanta, Sacramento, Cleveland, New Orleans, Minneapolis, Tampa, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, and Orlando. In each city, 911 calls from mobile phones were being systematically misrouted to neighboring jurisdictions, creating transfer delays that added 2 to 8 minutes to emergency response times. The routing errors weren't random. They were precisely targeted at high-volume call periods in densely populated areas where delayed response would have maximum impact. morning and evening commute hours when traffic accidents peaked, afternoon periods when cardiac events spiked due to heat and activity levels, evening hours when residential emergencies and crime incidents increased. The system was routing emergency calls to the wrong dispatch centers at exactly the times when those dispatch centers would be least able to handle the additional unexpected volume. At 15:18 Eastern Time, a dispatcher at the Mecklenburg County PSAP in Charlotte noticed she was receiving an unusual number of calls from addresses outside her coverage area. Normally, she might receive 1 or 2 misrouted calls per shift, rare enough to be noteworthy when they occurred. In the past hour, she had received 14 calls that required transfer to other jurisdictions. The addresses were all legitimate emergency situations within Charlotte, but they were in areas covered by different dispatch centers. She mentioned it to her supervisor during a brief lull in call volume. The supervisor pulled call logs and confirmed the pattern. Multiple calls from areas that should have been routed elsewhere were coming to their center. She contacted the technical support team that maintained the E911 routing infrastructure and reported the anomaly. The tech support team added it to their ticket queue with moderate priority. Routing issues were annoying but usually resolved themselves or were fixed during scheduled maintenance windows. What nobody realized yet was that the misrouting was bidirectional. While Mecklenburg County was receiving calls that should have gone elsewhere, their legitimate calls were being routed to other jurisdictions. The net effect was that every PSAP in the affected cities was handling approximately the same total call volume. But a significant percentage of those calls were from wrong jurisdictions and required manual transfer. The system appeared to be functioning at normal capacity while actually degrading response efficiency by 20 to 30%. At 16:42 Eastern Time, a call came into the Richmond Police Department from a woman reporting an armed robbery in progress at a convenience store. She was hiding in a storage room and could hear the suspect threatening the clerk. The call should have been routed to the Richmond Police PSAP, which could dispatch officers who were less than 3 minutes away. Instead, it was routed to the Henrico County Sheriff's Office. The transfer process took 93 seconds, time during which the robbery escalated into a violent assault. By the time Richmond police officers arrived, the clerk had been shot and the suspect had fled. The routing system was making decisions based on a database that had been quietly modified. The database contained mapping information that associated geographic coordinates with specific PSAPs. When a 911 call came in with location data, the system queried this database to determine where to send the call. The database modifications were subtle. Certain coordinate ranges had been reassigned to incorrect PSAPs. The changes affected approximately 8% of the geographic area in each of the 23 cities. Not enough to crash the system or trigger obvious failures, but enough to create systematic misrouting that degraded emergency response. The database modifications had been introduced 3 weeks earlier during a routine software update to the E911 infrastructure. The update had come from the telecommunications equipment manufacturer through official channels. It had been tested in staging environments and had passed all quality checks. The update was supposed to improve location accuracy for indoor 911 calls and enhance routing efficiency. It did those things, but it also included the hidden modifications to routing tables that would cause systematic misrouting when activated. The modifications included a trigger mechanism. For 3 weeks, they had been dormant, present in the system but not affecting operations. On July 19th at 14:00 Eastern Time, the trigger activated. The modified routing tables went live. Emergency calls began being misdirected, and the system was designed to make the misrouting appear random and technical rather than systematic and malicious. At 18:15 Eastern Time, emergency dispatch supervisors in multiple cities were comparing notes during a national conference call that happened to be scheduled that evening. The call was routine coordination about upcoming software upgrades and shared best practices. But multiple supervisors mentioned they were experiencing unusual routing problems that day. As they compared specifics, the pattern became undeniable. 23 cities, all experiencing similar misrouting, all starting around the same time that afternoon. This wasn't a technical glitch. This was coordinated infrastructure compromise affecting emergency response systems across multiple states simultaneously. The conference call transitioned from routine coordination to crisis response in less than 10 minutes. Emergency management agencies were contacted. The FBI's cyber division was notified. The NSA was alerted because E911 infrastructure was classified as critical national security infrastructure. At 19:03 Eastern Time, the NSA's analysis teams began pulling network traffic data and system logs from affected cities. They quickly identified the source, the routing database modifications introduced in the software update 3 weeks earlier. But the analysis also revealed something more concerning. The misrouting wasn't just degrading response times, it was collecting data. Every misrouted call generated metadata that was being transmitted to external servers. The data included call volumes, caller locations, response times, and dispatch patterns. Someone was building a detailed map of emergency response infrastructure and capabilities. By 1947 Eastern Time, analysis showed the full scope of the attack. Since activation at 14:00, the system had misrouted approximately 11,400 calls across 23 cities. The average delay caused by misrouting and manual transfer was 3.7 minutes. For a cardiac arrest victim, that delay reduced survival probability by approximately 15%. For a severe trauma patient, it significantly increased the risk of death from blood loss. For a fire emergency, it allowed fires to grow substantially larger before suppression efforts began. Statistical modeling suggested the delays had likely resulted in additional casualties that wouldn't have occurred with proper routing. The models estimated between 12 and 18 preventable deaths from cardiac events that received delayed response. Another 8 to 12 deaths from trauma incidents where the critical golden hour of emergency care was compromised. Property losses from fires that had more time to spread were estimated at over $40 million. The human and economic costs were mounting, and the attack had only been active for 6 hours. But the deeper analysis revealed the attack's true objective wasn't the casualties or costs from misrouting. It was preparation for something larger. The metadata being collected showed emergency response capabilities, dispatch center capacities, average response times, and geographic coverage patterns. The attackers were mapping the emergency response infrastructure in 23 cities. They were learning which areas had fastest response times, which dispatch centers were most stressed, which times of day had highest call volumes, and which types of emergencies consumed the most resources. That intelligence would be invaluable for planning coordinated attacks. If you knew exactly how long it took for police to respond to different neighborhoods, you could time criminal operations to exploit response gaps. If you knew which dispatch centers were overwhelmed during specific hours, you could create diversionary incidents that would delay response to primary targets. If you understood the full topology of emergency response infrastructure, you could identify the single points of failure that would cause systemic collapse. At 20:34 Eastern Time, emergency protocols were activated. The E911 routing system had to be reverted to a previous version immediately, even though reverting software in production systems was extremely risky and could potentially disrupt emergency services. But continuing to operate with compromised routing was more dangerous. Technical teams across 23 cities began the rollback process, working to restore correct routing tables while maintaining continuous emergency call capability. The rollback wasn't simple. The E911 system was distributed across multiple service providers and jurisdictions. Each had their own infrastructure, but they all relied on shared routing databases maintained by telecommunications carriers. Rolling back the database changes required coordination among AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and other carriers. It required testing to ensure the rollback didn't introduce new problems. And it had to be done while emergency calls continued flowing through the system at a rate of approximately 10,000 calls per hour nationwide. At 21:18 Eastern Time, the first city completed rollback. Oklahoma City's E911 routing returned to pre-compromised configuration. Emergency calls began routing correctly. Dispatch supervisors confirmed that calls from specific areas were reaching the correct PSAPs without requiring transfers. But the rollback revealed another problem. The compromised routing had caused such disruption that dispatch centers were running significantly behind. Calls that had been received and transferred hours earlier were still waiting in queues. The backlog would take hours to clear even with correct routing restored. By 23:45 Eastern Time, all 23 cities had completed rollback. Emergency routing was functioning correctly, but the damage assessment was just beginning. During the 9 hours and 45 minutes the attack was active, the system had misrouted approximately 8,200 calls. The cascading delays had affected an estimated 340,000 people who called 911 that day across the affected cities, either because their calls were misrouted or because the misrouted calls created backlogs that delayed response to their correctly routed calls. The CDC and emergency medicine researchers began retrospective analysis of emergency call outcomes. They compared survival rates and response times for cardiac events, trauma cases, and other time-critical emergencies during the attack period to historical averages for the same cities and times of day. The preliminary analysis suggested the routing delays had contributed to approximately 27 additional deaths that might have been preventable with normal response times. 27 people who dialed 911 expecting help and receiving it too late because their calls were systematically misdirected to wrong dispatch centers. Some were cardiac patients who needed immediate defibrillation. Some were trauma victims who needed rapid blood loss control. Some were people trapped in fires that had more time to spread. The attacks hadn't killed them directly. It had simply delayed the help that might have saved them. The FBI investigation traced the software update compromise to a sophisticated supply chain attack. The telecommunications equipment manufacturer's software distribution servers had been breached 6 months earlier. Attackers had gained access to code signing certificates and software build systems. They had studied the E911 routing infrastructure, understanding how the database mapping worked and where modifications would have maximum impact while remaining difficult to detect. The malicious code was modular and well-engineered. The database modifications were separate from the trigger mechanism, which was separate from the data exfiltration functionality. Each component appeared benign in isolation. Only when activated together did they create the misrouting attack. The code had been hiding in production systems for 3 weeks, waiting for the July 19th trigger date. The choice of July 19th appeared random at first, but deeper analysis revealed it was deliberate. Historical data showed July 19th typically had high emergency call volumes due to summer heat, increased outdoor activities, and midsummer travel, creating higher traffic accident rates. The attackers had chosen a date when emergency services would already be stressed, maximizing the impact of additional delays caused by misrouting. The intelligence gathering aspect of the attack was particularly concerning. Over 9 hours and 45 minutes, the attackers had collected detailed operational data about emergency response in 23 major American cities. They knew which neighborhoods had slowest police response, which dispatch centers were most overloaded, which times of day had least emergency service capacity. That intelligence could be sold to criminal organizations, used to plan terrorist attacks, or employed in future cyber operations against critical infrastructure. By July 21st, enhanced monitoring systems were deployed across E911 infrastructure nationwide. New anomaly detection algorithms watched for unusual routing patterns. Manual verification procedures were added for routing database updates. The telecommunications carriers implemented additional security layers for software distribution systems. But the fundamental vulnerability remained. E911 routing depended on database tables that could be manipulated if attackers gained sufficient access to the systems maintaining them. The economic impact extended beyond the immediate casualties and property damage. Cities faced lawsuits from victims and their families. Insurance companies contested claims arguing the deaths were caused by cyber attack rather than natural causes. Emergency service agencies faced staffing and equipment costs from the extended response to the crisis. The long-term total was estimated to exceed $680 million in legal settlements, insurance claims, system upgrades, and operational impacts. But the psychological impact was broader. Millions of people in 23 cities learned that when they dialed 911, their call might not reach the correct responders. The system they trusted for emergencies had been compromised. Even after technical corrections were made, trust in emergency services declined. Some people hesitated to call 911 when they needed help, unsure if their call would be properly routed. Others called unnecessarily to test whether the system was working, adding to dispatch workloads. The attack demonstrated how critical communication infrastructure had become vulnerable through its own complexity. E911 systems had evolved to provide faster, more accurate emergency response. But that evolution created dependencies on databases, routing algorithms, and automated decision-making that could be manipulated. The redundancy and geographic distribution that made the system resilient to natural disasters didn't protect against systematic software compromise that affected multiple cities simultaneously. The 27 deaths were officially attributed to various causes: cardiac arrest, trauma, smoke inhalation, blood loss. The death certificates didn't mention that 911 calls had been misrouted or that emergency response had been delayed. But the forensic analysis showed clear correlation. These were people who had called for help at times when the E911 system was actively misdirecting calls. Their emergencies were time-critical. The delays were long enough to matter. They were casualties of infrastructure compromise that most people never knew occurred. On July 19, 2025, emergency dispatch systems were processing calls normally. People across 23 cities dialed 911 expecting help. Their calls were answered by dispatchers who sent emergency responders. Everything appeared to be functioning. But 18,000 calls that day were routed to wrong jurisdictions. 340,000 people were affected by cascading delays. 27 people died waiting for help that came too late because their calls were systematically misdirected. The routing was corrected. The database was restored. Emergency response returned to normal. But the attack revealed how easily critical communications infrastructure could be weaponized. A few modified entries in a routing database, a trigger activated at a calculated time. 9 hours and 45 minutes of systematic misrouting. That was all it took to degrade emergency response across 23 cities and gather intelligence about emergency service capabilities that could enable future attacks. The system is secure now. Better monitoring, enhanced verification, additional safeguards. But the vulnerability was demonstrated. Emergency communications can be manipulated. Calls can be misdirected. Response can be delayed. And people calling 911 in crisis won't know whether help is being dispatched from 4 minutes away or transferred from 40 kilometers away until it's too late to matter. The infrastructure that saves lives every day can be turned into infrastructure that delays. Delayed just long enough to cost lives. The attack proved that. The 27 casualties proved it. And the millions of people who depend on 911 can't know with certainty whether their call will reach the right dispatcher or be routed into a transfer loop while the emergency escalates.